Welcome to Weekly Open. I'm Brian. We got Don and Cred here as well. Thanks for being here. It's a pleasure to be with you. And let me tell you about our friends over at FTX. Go to weeklyopen.com/FTX where you can trade today directly from one asset to the other. Whether you're buying the dip, you can DCA, set your recurring orders with zero fees. Everything that you do over there on the FTX app. It's nice and easy, right on your mobile phone. Buy the dip, DCA, capitulate, whatever you need to do. Track your portfolio, see your poor performance while you're at it. Do it all at FTX, weeklyopen.com/FTX. Thanks to them for being our partners. Let's get to the show. Gentlemen, Don, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Cred, how are you?
Yeah, pretty good. 6 red weeklies in a row. I love a good record, but it's getting pretty silly in that regard. And
7.
This has never happened before. Oh, it's 7.
Yeah, it's
Great.
7 already.
So I can't count, and it's worse than I thought. Right?
Yeah.
But this is like the first time ever, I think.
It is.
Had that many consecutive red weeklies. So there are a lot of reversion trades that are getting stomped over by this type of move.
That's too low time frame for Don, so I'll put my screen up to show. Yeah, you can see it right there. The bear market retest in March 28th, 2022. And ever since, nothing but red. So there's a lot of pain out there. And I don't know. Don, you were just saying that you were fairly interested in the market at this point. What do you think? Do you think there's a chance we mew out of this and that wick was the low for the next month, or do we need some pain? Is the market set up for some kind of short squeeze or mean reversion, or you think it's just
I think so. Like a little bit. Obviously still looks really shit, right? And still feels really shit trading below monthly support. But like if you're looking at this, right, there is a chance that we revert back into the range. That's basically my play that I'm taking. Buying below the range, hoping for like it to just revert back into the range. At that point would look really good, right? And we have two more weeks to go. So there's like plenty of time. But that's obviously like that's bull cope just on its own, right? It's like we just broke the support basically and we're trading below it. So this is still like looking pretty rough on the monthly. And the next monthly support is down at like 14K in my view. I mean, you can argue 20K, whatever you prefer, but like the next support's quite far down. The thing that had me interested and still has me interested a little bit is the weekly, which I suspected we could actually like close back in the range for. So range high around like 60K, range low around like 30. And what we did basically was just barely close below it, which, I mean, I hate these kind of closes because I think it's close enough that you can't really make a call on it. Like it could be, okay, it's just like a breakdown. But then again, like if it was, would it have wicked this far? And in general, like it's just not conclusive, right? So I would have preferred if we closed a little bit higher, showed a little bit more strength into the weekly close, but it's not the worst. So looking at this, right, it's basically the same. What I'm hoping for essentially is basically that the exact same thing that we had at the upside happens on the downside. And the only reason why I really think that could be the case is because the sentiment is just flipped horribly. Like I went on vacation for 3 weeks, didn't really check Twitter. And I come back and people are like, when they're talking about a bounce, they're talking about like 31, 32, 33K, which is like not really a bounce in crypto land, right? Like 10% upside is like, you don't even talk about that usually. A proper bounce would easily take us to like 40K, or like you could even talk about like 60K again, just based on the fact that we tagged range low, Luna imploded and the entire market didn't. So I'm just like sentiment-wise, it's just completely nuts in my opinion. I mean, I get where they're coming from. It's just like all the traditional markets kind of play, and like just in general being beaten down after having taken this kind of run to the downside. But like Cred said, it's been 7 weeks to the downside, and we've had a capitulation event with Luna, right? Luna imploding is a big deal, and it's at least like short-term capitulation event. which I think is best expressed with people just selling their tether, being afraid that tether was going to zero just a couple of days ago. That's usually like a really, really good sign that people are just freaked the fuck out and aren't acting like rational anymore. They're just like, okay, UST went to zero, tether is going to zero, everything is going to zero, I need to get out, right? And that's usually like a good sign of capitulation. We didn't really have like Bitcoin specific capitulation like we usually do when Bitcoin bottoms, right? I mean, you can just look at this where you have like just one weekly candle that goes down like 50%, and we had the same thing back in 2018. So I'm not necessarily saying like the bottom is in 100%, and I mean the TA isn't really that strong either. It's just for me more like a sentiment kind of play, and I think people are just overestimating the weakness on the traditional markets for now. I could be wrong on that front though. So
can I ask
like, yeah, sure.
Context from a capitulation perspective,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think about in terms of volume? And I'm gonna move our screens around a little bit so it's more visible. But one of the things I find interesting on this chart is, we've got I'm gonna start putting some vertical lines where we had like capitulation style volume to coincide, and what I find interesting, if it wasn't the low, it was close to it. Like, so like it might have retested the low or something, but in the past, 5 years? Yeah. It's crazy to think of that being 5 years. But these kind of weeklies, one on the top side too, but in terms of like breakdown volume, where there's a volume candle that just absolutely stands out. So this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one, those all pretty much coincided with some form of like near low, near bottom, even if it was temporary here, like it was the start of the bear market here, and it was the end of the bear market here. It was the COVID capitulation here. It was the summer pre-bottom, but then we, we're grinding out of it from there. So it's not like so tradable in the short-term sense, but it's actually fairly tradable looking in the long-term sense. I think that's a worthy way to look at capitulation just from a pure volume perspective, or do you think that's another form of kind of coping about price action?
No, I think it's valid. I also think like a lot of the volume that we had is basically just in the Luna sense where people capitulated, right? It's not necessarily like you don't have to have like Bitcoin specific capitulation. You can have that like in the general market just by like if ETH would go down 70-80% while Bitcoin didn't move, I'd say that capitulation as well, even though I don't think that'd be happening. Luna, the same deal, right? The top 10 crypto that just goes to zero, and how big did UST get? I think it was in the top 10 as well, like top 10 stablecoin, just imploding. That's massive on the scale of like just people taking losses and people being forced out of position, right? Because like if you have a position going in Luna, be it like let's say you have like a margin position in Luna going. If that goes down 90%, you're going to have to close all other margin positions that you have going on as well, right? So it's not like you're being forced out, not by Bitcoin going down, but by Luna going down, just by like having, even if it's just a small margin position on Luna, which just aids the kind of capitulation that you see across markets, because people have to sell stuff that they don't necessarily want to be selling. So like I'd make the argument that like, yeah, the volume on Bitcoin alone is quite big, but it's also like on Luna and on UST, there's a shitload of trading going on. And then obviously that just like went through all the altcoins as well. So
what do you
I'm
think?
not, but by the way, I'm not saying this is the bottom of the bear market. I think there's a good chance that we go lower eventually. But yeah, like you basically like I like the example of the 5th of February in 2018 that you mentioned earlier, where we had like a nice bounce after. I think that seems reasonable. So like, that's December, like earlier, like the February stuff in 2018.
This stuff.
Yes, exactly.
That would indicate that you actually think that we're pretty early in the bear market.
Well, I mean, depending on how stocks go, yeah.
Cred, what do you think? Do you think this was a proper capitulatory moment, or do you think that there's a lot more capitulation that could still occur?
I'm not sure. Even if it was a proper capitulation, whatever that means, you usually still get to rebuy it or trade very close to it. So even if you're strongly in that camp that like that was it, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to jump in immediately, at least from like a medium-term trading point of view. I mean, from an investor point of view, yeah, if you believe that that's it, then the difference between 25 and 29 is immaterial if your target is 60, 100, whatever, right? But from like a mid-term trading point of view, it's quite often that in true capitulations, you get some sort of backfill of the wick or a retest or a new range or something in that same area that tests your metal, tests your conviction, but also if you're patient, gives you a chance to trade it properly if you miss the apex of the volatility. I think Don's higher time frame idea just makes sense, which is essentially that the market, if we take 30 to 60K as our range, breaking 60K looked really bullish, but did fuck all. And so this would be a mirror example where breaking 30K looks bearish, but does fuck all, right? That's from a purely technical point of view. I think one thing to also bear in mind is that this crypto-specific implosion has kind of distracted a lot of the people from what I think is still largely in the driving seat, which is this whole macro Fed correlation trade. I still don't see any like amazing evidence of that abating or that moving anywhere, as I'm sure you'll remind us with the dollar index move. And just in general, even this morning, right, when I was paying attention, when it was, and we'll discuss this as well, I'm sure, but when it came to, you know, when it hit the wires that LFG doesn't have any BTC left, you saw a bit of a crypto pop, right? And that was on the assumption that, you know, it was unclear whether that was going to be future supply coming to market. And given that they appear to have sold it or deployed it to protect the peg, the market interpreted that as a kind of, you know, there won't be that supply of BTC being sold with any immediacy, right? There's not this 1 point whatever billion overhang. And so crypto kind of went up a little, but as soon as stocks opened and they tanked, like that entire move got faded. And yeah, you know, completely back to BTC 500 mode. So that kind of, I think, is a stark reminder of what's still in the driving seat. And as I mentioned, like, I'm not very good at trading the in-between area. Like, if this is a failed range breakdown, that only becomes tradable to me like once the monthly chart starts to look more constructive, right? And if it isn't, well, then, you know, we get to gamble on it at much cheaper prices. The kind of interim trade where it looks like you've got a deep wick, but, you know, this kind of I was tweeting about yesterday to no success because people thought I was being deliberately ambiguous or obfuscatory, which kind of isn't what I do, right? But my argument is essentially that it hasn't, like, in terms of where the market is right now, it hasn't shown enough strength for me to say this is a clear range failed breakdown and that's bullish and it's reclaimed, yada, yada. But it's also not, it hasn't bounced hard enough for me to say, oh, well, it's at resistance and you can like sell a retest here or sell some shit which you didn't want to be holding in the first place. This is very much the churny in between meh period where you get like a mechanical bounce as a result of an outsized move. But it's not entirely clear whether that's trend reversing, mean reverting, whether there's anything at all, right? It's just kind of you get your mechanical bounce, and then people, the impatient, overtrade it basically. So that's kind of some medium time frame commentary. It'll be much clearer if it goes a lot lower or a little bit higher, at least for me.
Yeah, in terms of this is the bearish retest, like you could point at some of this stuff back here and say,
yeah, you could.
But the problem is, if it gets past that, this is no different. Like, so you're whether you're at 32 or 36, it's like, or that's even 38, like basically no difference in terms of bearish retest levels.
Right. The market can rally 20% and structurally not change a single thing, right? That's kind of the tricky spot.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do here is find out, like, where are we interested and in what are we interested? So in terms of what would we be interested in, do you think there's appetite and capacity for altcoins to outperform, or are you primarily going to be interested in ETH and BTC, or maybe inverse BTC and ETH, in terms of what you would even be willing to buy at the appropriate levels? Like, how are you going to delineate between what you'd be willing to buy?
I mean, personally, for me, it's going to be BTC and ETH, or in order of sizing, probably ETH and BTC, and maybe like 5-10% for like a Solana or something like that, maybe one or two other names. But primarily, as we've discussed on the show, the way I like to do these things is to pump the majors with the majority of my what I perceive to be kind of cycle low bottom buying size, and then when the narrative has become clearer, when it becomes more apparent where the flows are going to be in altcoin land, I'm happy to be quote unquote late to those, given how much upside they tend to present early, mid, and even late cycle. So it's kind of very overweight BTC and ETH, maybe one or two altcoins that I think are going to survive if they get really cheap, and then the rest I'll kind of let the market guide the way, even if I'm not super early to that.
I mean, it's the same for me, Bitcoin, ETH, and then I mean, there's a few ones. I mean, most stuff in the altcoin sphere just looks complete garbage. There's a few ones that look somewhat decent. I don't know if I actually have these on this trading view, but like Solana hit support. I think there's a chance that it ranges between like 50 and 90.
People got pretty mad, or I say mad, like I think there was a lack of belief that it could actually hit that range that we talked about between 25 and 50. And it did like
I mean, look, the show is really scary, right? Because you said Luna looks expensive at 40 and it went to zero, literally zero. So we've got to be clearly a bit careful in how we
said something like see it $9 or something like that.
What a gift that would be, eh?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think like stuff like Solana, like at like 46-ish, like I could see a nice bounce into like 70, 80. There's like a nice 2x that I think you could get. But most of the stuff just looks complete shit. And even that, like I think with regards to altcoins, and this is why, like I said, like I don't think we necessarily have bottomed the bear market. These coins, I think, like Solana needs to go back below $20, I think. It's just below how long, below, like somewhere like between like, I don't know, like 4 and 20, which I know is a huge range, but I think that's like where like this stuff can bottom longer term.
75% when it goes to 4.
Yeah, I mean, but like that's altcoins, right? They have like 10x, 100x, 1000x returns. And I think that is only really possible if they have like the drawdowns for it as well. And I think like with Solana, I think it'd be nice kind of bounce into 70, 80, 90. And then you start turning back down again and you get like the big, scary kind of shitty portion of the market. Because like, yeah, $200 to like 50 sucked for everyone that was holding it. But it's still bearable, right? I think there has to be like a little bit more to it. But yeah, that's just kind of my general altcoin view. I think like altcoins could 2x, 3x, 4x from here and still go down 90% after.
Well, you know, that's what the whole meme about, you know, once you're down a certain percentage, and this happened a ton when Luna was going down, you know, it's down 99%. It only has 1% to go. And if you enter the trade at that point, it can still go down 99%. So in the Solana case, like 95% is from the top is $12 or $13. And the difference between 95% and like 98% or something is another, whatever, 75%, you know? So it looks like just a few percent off the top, but it's a huge percentage in terms of where you actually manage to, from your entry to the potential Pico bottom. So people always think like, oh, you just bought when it was cheap and down a ton. That's not that hard. It can still be quite difficult.
Yeah. The best example is like, I mean, if you just look at the Luna trade that people took. So, I mean, you just look at this from like an hourly perspective, right? So this nuked and it went down. And I mean, we can look at it from a higher time frame. This is just hilarious. That's such a stupid chart. But like this nuked, right? Like from 100 to 1, 99% down, right? So let's say you bought one. It went down to 0.01, like again, 99%. So now you're down 99%. There's like legitimately no difference between you buying $100 up here or like at 1, because I mean this shit, it's just like it's the same magnitude. And at that point you're poor either way, right? If you're down 99%, doesn't really matter if you're down 99.9% or 99%, you're just fucked, right? And then if you bought there, it went down another 99%, and then you can keep on going basically. And then people see, okay, Luna bounced a shitload, right? Like Luna went up like 15,000% from the bottom. And people are like, it bounced so much, blah, 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 such an obvious trade, whatever. Not really. Like if you bought during any other bounce, you legitimately lost all your money, right? And then there was like one time where you actually had a bounce. And it's hilarious how far this went down, because like this can have a 15,000% bounce and still be down 99.999% or like almost that, because it went down so much. So it's like it sounds easier. Like you look at this, and you're like, oh shit, you just should have just bought like a bunch here at the low, and then you would have been rich. It's not how this works, right? And this is the same with the altcoins, where it's much more difficult than you think, even though it looks so easy in hindsight.
So I pulled up a chart. This is CoinTrader Pro. So they have these market cap driven charts. And that's what's interesting. As the hyperinflation occurs, the market cap actually bounced way more. So you're wrecked, obviously, because it's not redistributing those coins to existing holders, right? It's just new coins that hit the market. But the market cap actually bounced way more than you would have thought, because the hyperinflation was so high. So those adjustments that you show on the hourly chart, like it's even more of a bounce in terms of the total market cap. And I think that's going to get people confused as well. So Luna is a really difficult one to talk about in that sense, because, it's like, it's just a different situation because the supply is highly dynamic. Whereas, if we're looking at Solana and that kind of stuff, it's, they have inflation, but it's not like dynamic levels of inflation. So
it's not going to hyperinflate on you, basically.
Right.
The Luna stuff's just such a fucking Ponzi if you think about it. Like, it wasn't obvious before. I think, we talked about it. I think I mentioned the word Ponzi a couple of times, but it's like, it's so wild how this could fly, right? Like that you have more and more like Luna, the further price goes. This is just so wild. Like, this is so
what
crypto.
I'm amazing in it too is, in hindsight, when it was on the way up, I just ignored it. Honestly, it's just one of those that I know it's an algo stable, so therefore I know it's risky, but I don't really look into all the details of like what makes it a potential death spiral and tokenomics and all that. But there were plenty of warnings in hindsight, like where they started elevating to the top because they were right. And then they were getting engagement. Like, Dude quote tweeted the Freddie guy who basically laid out the entire game plan for how to break it and short it. And so there was quite a lot of evidence out there of people who had researched it, had recognized like this is completely unsustainable. It's only works as long as it's centrally backed, and that central backing is enough to support it. It's just, I think what's stunning is for it to break all the way before they just make adjustments to like account for it, fix it, change it, something, it was such an incredible example of like hubris from a team, governance, venture perspective, like all across the board. Unbelievable.
The crisis management was fucking awful, right? And it didn't help that Do Kwon was tweeting like, initially deploying more funds and then hang in there, we're doing X, Y, Z, and then everything fucking went to zeros. I'm sure there are a lot of people who wanted to sell their Luna or UST at significantly higher prices, and their fears were abated by his tweets about rescue plan, more money coming, this, that, the other, and ultimately they'll, didn't lead to shit. One thing I think narratively we should discuss is, first of all, I think more broadly, I've never seen my feed so split as to whether that was the bottom or it was literally the start of the move, and that the Luna implosion is only going to accelerate things. I normally have like a decent view or perspective on like, my feed is curated. It's mostly just like smart people. And this kind of split is as obvious as it's ever been. But the main argument kind of narratively, or I guess the narrative divide, is whether there are going to be downstream effects as a result of this implosion and how priced in those have been, right? So on the one hand, the bulls are arguing some version of, well, look, the implosion already happened. It got as bad as it could ever be and far worse. And the market, now we also know that there's no BTC left in LFG's reserves, like a negligible amount, and the market absorbed all of that like fairly decently, or at least it hasn't been reflected. We're still at 30K given that the biggest kind of wealth erasing event in our history, and that's interpreted positively. And of course, on the other side, the kind of Ari Pauls and the Chris Bernisks and a lot of the worryingly people like Wintermute now kind of writing to their LPs being like, hey, this is what you do in a bear market. It's like, holy shit, guys. I don't want to hear that from Wintermute, right? But they're all arguing some version of this is going to have negative downstream effects, more supply going to hit later, and the ramifications of something like this take longer than expected to come to market. I'm wondering where you gentlemen fall on that, or how you view that from a kind of framework.
I think the likelihood is somewhere in between and very offset in terms of who. So like some people who had no Luna exposure are in a great position. The people who had exposure to Luna, especially if they were like then losing their tail on in one way or the other between trying to repeg it or just lost a lot of their mark to market, assets under management, are going to end up with a lot of redemptions. Like that can be a spiraling effect on the people that did have that exposure. I think the people that didn't have that exposure are going to be in a pretty good position to take advantage of it, but they have no reason to move fast if their peers are basically being forced to unwind things, if they're getting redemptions or if they're having to cover other losses or whatever else. On the whole, though, I do think it's at least some degree of the longer unwind being true, but maybe not to the extent if you assume like everybody has exposure to it. Everybody didn't have exposure to it. I would even say it was a minority of the big funds that had exposure to it, but those that did, some of them are going to be punished severely. So I think you end up landing in the middle. It's not very exciting answer, but I think that's the most likely outcome. I think some are really going to be able to take advantage of this scenario, especially if they're risk managed and all that, and essentially pick up the pieces from those books that are going to have to unwind. Because I think that redemption process is going to be the biggest outcome in terms of the funds that did get affected. Is they'll have to sell other stuff to cover their losses as redemptions come in from their LPs.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that take. But it's like really, really tough to tell how much people are going to have to like unwind, and if at all, and if it's not like already happened a bunch. For me, like the one thing that I want to say about that entire part is that I feel like a lot of people are just sitting there, especially like on the fund side, where they're like, we can just give this time, like we have plenty of time and like zero FOMO,
Right.
which is really interesting because that's usually not the case, right? You usually get like massive FOMO whenever you have like a green candle. The thing is, we haven't had one in 7 weeks, right? So it's been like down only, and I feel like people are getting like, especially like retail as well, but like especially on the fund side, like everyone's just getting like super complacent. Like, okay, we have so much time, macro backdrop is bad, and that kind of narrative just gets entrenched so hard in everyone's mind, where it's like there's no way that can change. And I think it can change, doesn't have to, obviously, and I'm not saying it will. I'm just saying like you should have a plan for what happens if it does change, and I feel like a lot of people don't. So
it's like that thing where as soon as the market agrees on what a trend is, the trend is being close to over sort of thing, right?
That's probably true. I think my personal take is, to your point earlier, Cred, I think you probably will get a chance to test the convictions of those bottom buyers, but I don't know that I'm a buyer of like the 12, 14K narrative that you talked about, Don, unless the legacy economy, like the rest of the economy, not the legacy, just like really, really heavily melts down, which I'm also not that big of a believer in. I think the kind of grind down thing is more likely. And that could end up with us having lows on Bitcoin in the high teens, low 20s, fill that wick in a bit, make it tough. But those, if you bought the bottom this round, it still ends up being a pretty good buy. That doesn't necessarily equate to like your Solana bottom buys being good buys. You know what I mean? Like the contraction in the market, the dollars flowing out of crypto are going to flow out of the long tail more aggressively. then they'll flow out of the high end stuff like the Bitcoins and whatnot. I also do think there's some, in a vacuum, if you go look back at some of the things where, you drew these lines like, oh yeah, I'll buy a Uniswap when it gets back to $3 or $4, and then it goes and hits that level that we haven't seen since December 2020. This is the type of thing that in the long run, we may look back at this and be like, man, what a great deal. And what I'm talking about is wrong. Like these capitulated harder already had 90% drops. I don't like, but we're forgetting about these coins even existing, maybe we'll have time on these, but I do think there will be great deals on some of these altcoins in the long run. So I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth a bit, but I think maybe stay home and be in the safer trades if you're going to try to buy the lows or DCAN on the majors, but don't forget about some of the like higher tier altcoins that might be down 95, 98%, whatever, that end up being like really unbelievable long-term trades. Like Uniswap's not going anywhere. I'm going to be interested in Uniswap 6 months from now, 12 months from now, no matter like wherever the market is overall. I think some of these are going to end up having awesome setups for us. And I think there's value in paying attention over the coming year. Maybe not like hourly, but looking at your charts once a day or once a week, I think will pay off very well.
I think like honestly, like the next few weeks are probably going to be explosive, because at the end of the day, and a bunch of people asked me why, like I said, like the stupid grindy like range thing is over. Like that's something that I tweeted like 2 weeks ago. Or like not 2 weeks, it's actually like 4 or 5 days ago. Time flies. And it feels like so much shit happened in the last few days. But the reason why I said that, right, is because we're trading below the macro range already. So either this is the true breakdown and then we're gonna fly to the downside, I think, or it's a false one and we're gonna fly to the upside, right? So like, I don't think there's necessarily a world in which we go like spend like 2, 3, 4, 5 months down here sideways. Could obviously happen, has happened before, but this just seems unlikely to me. So I think we're probably like it's probably time to like take a really, really close look on everything that you want to be buying. And like that's the thing that I talked about earlier with the complacency, right? Where it's like you have in your head what you want to be buying, you have like your prices, and then you like Ledger said, you don't look at it anymore. And like most of the stuff actually hit the prices that you want that you want them to hit. Like I said, with Solana at like 50 and a bunch of stuff hitting their like higher time frame support levels. But given the macro and given like how everything looks and given the Luna situation, no one really gives a shit, right? Like, oh yeah, they hit support, but I mean, why would I want to be buying if macro looks shit? Or why would I want to be buying anything if like Luna exploded? And all that kind of stuff is going to be, if it bottoms, which I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but if it bottoms, it's like that one thing where you're like, like you look back on it like 3 months from now, you're like, these all hit my levels. I don't know why I didn't buy them. And the reason why you never buy these kind of extreme levels, and I mean, I've been like somewhat of like an offender myself, is because you just get preoccupied with other stuff and like something seems more pressing always. Whether that be like after a crash to 14K, because I can guarantee you, like, you crash to 14K, the same thing is going to be playing out, right? Where you're not going to be buying because like X and Y is going to come again.
You'll say it's going to 7K or something. Like you'll
convince exactly. Yeah, you just move your price targets down, right? And you move the narratives as well, because like at 14K, something bad would have happened to the S&P, and then you're like, okay, the world is in such shambles. Who needs crypto anymore? And then it's like at some point it's going to bottom, it's going to bounce 500%, and you're going to be wondering, why the fuck didn't buy that? And the reason is because it's so easy to get caught up in the narratives, and it's so easy to kind of parrot whatever everyone else is saying. This is the stuff that I'm seeing on Twitter right now, where people like took ages to kind of get on board okay, we're kind of copy trading the S&P and we're bearish in general. And then once they kind of subscribe to the idea, they just get locked in so hard that they can't see anything beyond that. And that's something that's like very, very dangerous to like any trader or investor, because I mean, at the end of the day, like the moment everyone agrees with you on your stance on that front, right, you're probably offside already. So
yeah. I do think, I don't know from a levels perspective, but I think from a time perspective, the S&P and the Qs are due for a bounce as well. They've had just as many down weeks. I want to bring up a component that's more time oriented, so yearly open levels. And I'm going to start with traditional market. So this is the NASDAQ, and we're below the 2021 open. The 2022 open was this incredible Pico top forever. You know, like the time you look back 15 years from now and just in awe at, you know. But we're below the 2021 open. 2020 open is a long way away. 200 is in, you know, no man's land there. The S&P is not yet to the 2021 open, but that's a level that I have in mind personally, because I think that could be the like type of washout level that ends up getting bought in a surprising, like that surprises people. But this market similarly is due for mean reversion. And when it does mean revert, it's probably going to spend like a month or two doing so. You know, it's going to be many weeks establishing some trading ranges that are going to be difficult for people to effectively convince themselves to exit, because then they'll like get the hopium back in. And that could coincide with what you were talking about, Don, with kind of testing things from the underside. What I find interesting using the same tool set, I think it's helpful from a mental framework point of view, like where am I versus where I started X year. Bitcoin is right at its 2021 open, because, you know, it run heavy at the end of 2020. So Ethereum opened lower that year, but has quite a bit of a ways to catch up because it pumped as soon as the year started. So I just think some of those are interesting to keep an eye on, like where were we at X year, because I'm really torn, but my personal bet is that S&P is going to go test its 2021 open, which will coincide with some of these breakdowns for crypto. Yeah, that's my 2 cents. Do y'all have any component or any thoughts on the like calendar component of the market?
Probably just on average, you know, crypto goes up more than you think, down more than you think, and chops for longer than you think. And even extremely reflexive bottom buys like the COVID crash still test your conviction for some time. And it's testing your conviction at a time where you're most fragile because everything's terrifying and, you know, time actually moves very slowly. When you've bought something that looks like it could go down another 50% any second, and it stays at your entry for like 1 to 3 weeks, that's pretty rough. So I'm not rushing for any of this. As far as any seasonality or anything like that, I think in general, I've seen some models suggesting that the Fed's going to keep hiking into like 2024. I think that was like Bank of America or something. I don't buy that for a second, right? I think it's going to, you know, peak hawkishness is going to come much sooner than that. And that's the thing, markets are going to bottom not on when the Fed turns dovish. I think it's going to be when you see peak hawkishness, right? Or when the markets start like calling a bluff on how much more tightening is there really going to be. And, you know, they're supposed to be a forward discounting, forward looking, whatever type of mechanism. So you'd expect them to kind of front run that a little bit, like, okay, this is as bad as it's going to get, this is as tight as it's going to get, so maybe we can start pumping some risk. And I think honestly, like, I wouldn't be surprised if we see that structurally towards the end of this year, maybe like mid next year at the latest. I think it'll come a bit sooner than expected, although that's just pure conjecture, pontification, more than anything. I do think the perspective is worth keeping in mind. I tried to tweet about this earlier, that everyone's a bull, right? Like everyone wants to own a bunch of Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. And most people you speak to, they have like a long crypto multi-cycle type of thesis and have the assumption that it's going to form new all-time highs sooner rather than later, all that type of stuff, right? So the only real disagreement is how much of a discount are you going to get before you pile in long, right? And I also think history won't be terribly kind to participants who just sold all their crypto because of macro without a plan to buy it back. I think a large chunk of that volume for that trade is going to come very late, and then is going to get left sidelined in fiat, to use that famous phrase. So if you don't want to be frowned upon by your ancestors as far as managing your crypto portfolio, etc., if you manage to ride the risk off wave early, and caught that correlation trade and weren't caught with your pants down, that's awesome. But don't get into the doomer mindset that everything's going to go down forever and S&P, this is the big crash and nothing's going to recover and paradigm shift, etc. Like, I don't buy that for a second. And yeah, I don't want to be that person who just sold names he liked because boomers sold their coins. Their coin equivalents
on by your ancestors is some serious peer pressure.
Yeah, I know exactly. That's kind of what it feels like, right? I just think
whole Bitcoin.
I just think like there's going to be a period where the hindsight analysis in 2020 whatever is going to be that Fed tightened, markets caught offside, it was frothy beforehand, stuff went down, and then the Fed stuff stopped and stuff went up again, right? I think broadly speaking, we're going to at some point enter a time period where that's going to be the analysis looking back on this period. And I think there has to be a plan to buy back stuff you like, be it on strength, being on weakness, be on a DCA basis, but just like surrendering your investment career because boomers are selling stocks and not having a plan to buy back, and then you join this QAnon chat and everyone's like doom spiraling about everything going to zero. Just don't do that. Don't be that person. And there's a very practical example that you mentioned. I think Don made this point. When you go down to like really cheap prices and it still feels bad because people are expecting even lower prices. That was literally what was happening at 3K, right? Like I remember tweets from people being like, oh, why buy ETH at 100 when you can buy it at like $40 tomorrow? That type of stuff. Like at a certain point, you just have to punt. The market pays you to take risk at the end of the day, especially if you've got like a multi-cycle long crypto thesis, assuming stuff is going to make new all-time highs and it's not total garbage. Like at a certain point, you've got to recognize these conditions for what they are, which is really special. Like this is probably only going to happen like, I don't know what, 2 or 3 times in our lifetimes that you get really aggressive, like high inflation, aggressive tightening cycle, with the precursor of things being frothy, everything turbo nukes. Like realistically, in our lifetimes, how many more times is that going to happen on a cyclical credit cycle basis? 2 times, maybe 3 times for an absolute peak if stuff gets really broken. So viewing it as an opportunity, as cringe as it sounds, or at least having a framework to like push the green button on stuff, I think is important. Don't get caught up in the doom spiral posting it. No one ever makes money that way.
Yeah, I think the likelihood of us talking about the 2020s the way our parents' generation talked about the 1970s is very high, but also the likelihood is it's going to be quicker than that time. Everything's been happening quicker. Man, I was just looking through some charts and I found one of my old squiggles that I don't even think I was a big believer in, but I was like, this breakout is so garbage on IW. Man, it's just like, all right, so is this where we're selling? It's tough. I feel like there's got to be some mean reversion here. And
what do you think of the 200-week front run, by the way? I was going to ask you earlier. I completely forgot on BTC.
Yeah, I honestly think it'll still get tested. I think front running it the first time and then like ignoring it the second time is a pretty likely outcome, but it then still working. If it goes below it, I would probably get pretty active in terms of just DCAing or buying the recapture, but with everything I've got. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, I think I'm so convicted of the 200 week. It's like we could have this type of scenario again where it like really tests your conviction and spends months dragging it. Like that, people would just be talking about how it's going to break down and it's going to not work this time and yada yada. I really think this all is just going to take much time to repair. I don't think this is a like this, buy the Pico bottom and then be up only forevermore and everybody's happy. I think we're going to be in some serious pain from a sideways and contraction perspective for quite a while. And I think we're going to bleed out some of these altcoins and layer 1 trades and stuff way more than we anticipate. Unfortunately, it just always happens that way.
Mm-hmm. With the altcoins, I definitely agree. I mean, even if you bounce, right? Like you just look at these coins. I mean, you just look at Dogecoin, turn off log chart or whatever.
I mean, we talked about back to 1 cent is when the market bottoms.
Bro, I mean, very likely. Like that kind of stuff. Like how high? Like Dogecoin could easily go and bounce like 160%, right? And still be in the macro kind of like way to fucking 10 sets again, right? And like express that in USD and you have the same. Oh, wow, this actually looks pretty horrendous already. But it could do the same thing, right? I mean, we've seen this on other altcoins as well. Like if you compare this to how XRP played out in the past, right? We've seen these like bounces that eventually still take it out. It's on the XRP BTC pair, that eventually still take it all the way back down again, right? So it's like these coins, I think, have put in their highs. Like the modern coins that we have, excluding maybe one or two or three that actually stick around, because like at some point of like some coins do stick around longer, but I think most of the coins of like the older cycles have had their all-time high already, and they're only going to be down from there. It's just they can bounce a lot, and they can just like they can go up, they can go down, but in general I think the tops for a lot of the coins that we're talking about have already been set, especially in Bitcoin terms. Not necessarily like in USD terms. You never know. Bitcoin can like push up and pull these back to all-time high in USD terms. But I think against Bitcoin, most of the stuff in my list and most of the stuff in your list as well has already topped pretty much forever. And then you're going to get new coins, and you're going to get new narratives, and you're going to get new stuff.
What do they love the most? It's like take the new coin that doesn't have the baggage. Like we're not talking in this 2021 cycle about EOS, you know, like that was a 2017 pump, and ever since then I don't know what it's doing. Who cares? And maybe we do, maybe we don't do that with a couple of them, you know, the Solana, or I don't know what all I put in that category, but there's definitely a big chunk of those, especially layer ones, that are going to end up feeling like EOS or like Strat. Remember that one? That was that was a blockchain. A bunch of those. There's tons of them. I can't remember all of them, but they're.
Do GME and AMC have to die for the kind of just cyclically speaking?
I think they have to unwind. Yeah, I think that's the same as Doge back to a penny, GME back to $5 or whatever, you know.
I think you make like a very valid point. It's something I actually looked at a while. That's like I don't actually.
Nice arrow, bro.
Yeah, I don't actually remember drawing this and in what context, but in general, I think on the GME front is something that I thought about this morning when I was looking at charts. I think actually, like if you're buying stocks when this is all the way fully retraced, you're probably gonna hit the bottom. So I mean, there's plenty of space still to go.
You wouldn't buy that. You buy other stuff when that hits the bottom. Like
you don't buy GME, obviously. No,
I don't want to own Doge at a penny. I don't care. But I do want to, like, when Doge hits a penny, that people have round tripped the most popular liquid greatest trade of 2021. You know, people still have Doge to $1, Doge to $3, like whatever in their handles. And maybe Doge would be a great trader. I don't know, but it's probably not the one I would take. And yeah, I very, very much think that you have to have these times to get the money flowing back out of the long tail into the core stuff, and your Bitcoin and Ethereum relative performances are going to be much higher. We have not touched on ETH-BTC. It's also getting towards the end. Should we discuss? Do you think has ETH kind of elevated itself in terms of being a major? Is it on Bitcoin's scale? Or do you think it could just get totally wrecked on a relative pair and go back to 0.04?
I think it's kind of proven itself, but it's not even close to Bitcoin's level, I think. But really? It's not even like there's like this weird thing where Bitcoin is like far off, and then there's ETH, and then there's other altcoins that are far off as well. In my mind, anyway. Like you have Bitcoin up here, and then you have ETH, and then you have the shit coins down here. But like this distance is still huge to me. If you know what I mean. Like there's like this stuff goes to zero eventually. This like ETH might not, and then Bitcoin very likely won't. That's kind of like my framework anyway. And I think like this cycle has been pretty impressive for ETH, right? If you consider that it has pretty much just moved up with Bitcoin. It's not necessarily been like, okay, an old season pump or whatever. It's just been, okay, Bitcoin goes up, ETH goes up more. You just look at like 2020, beginning of 2020, ETH BTC actually has been going up ever since, outperforming Bitcoin by quite a bit. And I think that's like not something that you should be underestimating, but I still think like, I don't know why, but people like love to have the argument with me that ETH isn't an altcoin, which I don't subscribe to. I think there's still, you get like everything dumping on the altcoin front, you're going to get ETH dump as well. But it's obviously and very, very like that's very, very obviously the best altcoin in town, in my opinion. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in ETH long term. I also think this ETH BTC chart, even though it's so hard to trade, I think it really looks bad. And I think that flies in the face of the merge and L2 narrative and stuff rolling from L1 to ETH kind of being dominant in that space. I think you could believe all that and it still break down. I look at it as from a relative basis, Bitcoin is probably the safest thing to be in if you're going to have exposure. And I think ETH, if you trade that pair directly, ETH 0.04 to 0.045, 0.05 would be a fantastic buy. And is it could definitely happen. Get that. If you look at the 200-week moving averages, Bitcoin's a lot closer. ETH could go to $1,000, right? It's at 2,000. That's another 50% down. I don't really see like that. I don't think Bitcoin has to be at 15K for ETH to be at 1K. And that makes me think ETH BTC has a good chance of breaking down. As much as I like ETH, and I think that'll make an incredible buy. Like if you can get ETH at its 200-week moving average of 1,000, 1,100, somewhere in there, I think that is a magnificent buy. I think it's possible in a capitulatory event.
Yeah, I agree with that in general. I also think it has some pretty good memes as a result of the recent cycle that are likely to render ETH BTC up only next cycle whenever the clear one comes. Specifically, the fact that it's the home of premium NFTs and just the birthplace of the NFT sector as a whole, which is a huge deal. I think that commands a premium. And then after the Luna implosion, I think there's going to be some renewed skepticism, hopefully, towards layer ones, and ETH will command a kind of Lindy premium, if you will, as a result as well. And just generally, as Don pointed out, cycle to cycle, whenever stuff's going up, ETH BTC is a kind of an up-only chart or like a good proxy for trend. So I think the memes we built this cycle didn't even mention DeFi, right? But generally speaking, the memes we built this cycle and some of the stuff that's happened towards the end with other layer ones, when things turn around, I think you want to own ETH, or at least I want to own ETH for those reasons.
A lot of people talked about this being Ethereum's Bitcoin 2017 cycle, like go to 20K type stuff. And I think what might be interesting is what if that's this upcoming cycle, if it's low is at 1,200 or 1,100 or 1,000, but then it goes to 15, 20K. I think that's a very rational trade. Like I think it could go to 1,000, and then my upside for ETH is definitely above 10K. I think 10 to 20K is very possible. So I think your next like 20x all in a new cycle could definitely be in Ethereum as we identified its premium use case. And I'm going to be willing to make that trade.
Same, but people cope themselves out of it by saying, "Oh, ETH is so big already; it's number 2 by market cap, yada yada," and then it just really does well cycle to cycle, and it's pretty contained as far as risk curve stuff goes, which is why, again, strategy-wise for me, kind of Bitcoin and ETH, and probably overweight ETH in terms of, oh my god, the market's going to zero, and do I want to slug some deltas type of trade, and then whatever shiny toy comes out next cycle, you can ride that as well. But as a kind of core basis for a portfolio, we're adding exposure and kind of over meaningful time frames aside from day trading or whatever. I think ETH, BTC, and then maybe like 5% for some previous cycle shitcoins like Solana.
I think one other component of this, and I don't know that this will actually happen, but I think it would make the ecosystem more healthy overall, is right now protocols primarily build in their utility value, their fee structures, all that. There's a lot of their own token built into that. And I think what could strengthen the Ethereum ecosystem is if protocol revenue, transactability within the protocol, whatever, if a lot of that went more ETH native, because we've seen this evidence of, DeFi tokens and all this stuff just not being able to pace with ETH in a bull market very well. And I wonder, like, if there's more stuff that's operating based on ETH native fee structures and rakes on using the protocols, if that helps ETH be dominant even more. I think I would be really interested in protocols that look into that more.
Yeah, it's just like the classic trade, right? Markets look like shit. Everyone knows that ETH is probably going to stick around and it's pretty liquid. It gets slugged with a bunch of size. It goes up, uptrend, but then it becomes expensive the later we get into the cycle. There are some ETH killer replacement layer one trades, hopefully less cynical versions than the ones we've had this cycle. Those get washed out. The market washes out, and then you kind of run it back again. Maybe that'll change, but for the time being, that seems like a fine mental model in terms of names get bid first, because they're names when they're reliable and generally have an expectation of them setting all-time highs cycle to cycle. And then later in the cycle, the cynical narratives comes out about fees or them not being good enough, and that leads to other trades which eventually kind of unwind, which is sort of what we're seeing now with layer ones. Some to a spectacular extent, but others, I mean, look at like Sol ETH and some of those other charts. They sort of speak for themselves, right?
All right. As we head out, is there anything that y'all are really looking forward to for this week, or what's on your mind?
I mean, I'm looking forward to. I think it's going to be volatile, and I think I would like to see this week close quite green. If that's the case, we can all just slam the bid together next week, I guess. Even the confirmation traders are going to be happy with that. So I think that's what I'm looking forward to. If it doesn't happen, I mean, after you've had 7 weeks of downside, if you don't get some relief, the only thing that you can really get is full-blown capitulation. So maybe we'll have to get the wallet out and actually buy some massive nukage. But I think we're in for some volatility. I don't think even if it's just retesting, like you guys have been talking about, retesting the wick and then going back up again. I think there's going to be trades to be taken just based on the fact that we're in this weird situation where we broke the range, the macro range, and now people are forced to take action instead of just looking. And if you're not taking action, you're probably going to be forced to take action by the market at some point. So I'm actually looking forward to the volatility that we're going to get. I think it's going to be definitely going to come in. And I think Bitcoin and ETH being a massive support for me, ETH USD, actually even closed above it, just makes it so that I have a little bit more conviction on the upside than on the downside. So I'm team bull still, excited about it. But obviously, I mean, there is room for this to go to shit, especially if the S&P goes to shit.
Yeah. I can go next and you can close us out if you want, Cred. I personally think that we're going to make some form of tweezer bottom, lower low, extra deep wick. I would love to see 24K Bitcoin, $1,500, $1,600 ETH, because I think that would mark a significant bottom. Not a cycle bottom, but multi-month buy with confidence. And I think that could coincide with the traditional market washing out and also setting a bottom that's worth buying. And I think that level of volatility, so I agree with you there, Don, get some real volatility, make it plainly obvious. I think if this week ended green, but it makes a lower wick, would be the type of thing that would just really give enough confidence to say, okay, the people that sold for a little while, and we can have a month or two of tradable action. That's what I would like to see.
Both of those make sense. I'm still on BTC 500 watch until proven otherwise. I've been very vocal about versions of decoupling trade being really bad. And I still think that applies. So I'm going to keep an eye on legacy stuff. As far as market structure levels or whatever else, agree with Duck that ETH looks more constructive on a weekly closing basis. For me, still, there's a weekly structure that I care about. BTC is 32.3. thereabouts. And after, as we've counted, 18 red weeks in a row, it'd be nice to have some evidence of a failed breakdown or some absorption apart from just a long wick. And that would take the form of strength through that kind of 32.3 type of level. And then I'd at least put my day trading cap on and look for like 32.3 into 35 to 37, or at least some sort of monthly push. But I guess for me, it's A, BTC 500 watch, and B, looking for a change, some evidence of a failed breakdown, not one that sticks, in order to nibble at this more meaningfully. And I think there are going to be some really nice altcoin ranges to trade around. Like you mentioned, AVAX turbo nuked into its weekly consolidation between 24 and 40. Solana turbo nuked into weekly level at 47 with another level above it, and also the capitulation one at 25. So there's plenty to do, I think, but higher time frame strength still eludes the market for the time being. It'd be nice if that changed even for a little bit.
Yeah, man. It's been wild so far. All right. Thanks to everybody for joining us. We really appreciate you. And be sure to check out our partners over at FTX. Go to weeklyopen.com/FTX, where you can download the app, DCA, set your bids, whatever you want to do, trade directly from one asset to the other easily on the FTX app. Go to weeklyopen.com/FTX. Check out our episodes on weeklyopen.com and like and subscribe and all that good stuff. We appreciate you. Thanks for being here with us. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.